I'm Neil Whitaker, for those who don't know me. I run the exec desk here at For Recruitment. Typically the roles that I tend to look at are managing director, finance director, CFO, all across kind of C-suite level appointments really. But with my background being finance, typically the roles that I do tend to look at are finance director and CFO. Now, last couple of months, I ran an event which was based around becoming the finance director, and I've had a lot of questions since really to kind of run something around the role of a CFO and how that role is different to the traditional kind of finance director role. So hence the reason why I thought it'd be good to kind of run this panel debate. So without further ado, I think it's worth running straight into it. So today I'm joined by Michael Hughes, who is the ex-CFO of Euro Garages. I've got Louise, Britnell, who's the current CFO at Co-op Bank. And I've got Ian Storey, who was the ex-CFO over at Music Magpie. So if I just, first of all, just run round and you can give me just a quick brief background on yourself. So first of all, if we start with you, Michael.
Yeah, hi and good morning everybody. Ex-CFO makes it sound like I'm doing nothing with my time. I'm actually now the Chief Strategy Officer of EG. And I'll kind of talk about that in terms of what it means in terms of the CFO role as well. Been there for nearly 5 years now. Before that, I helped build EMR into an international business. And prior to that, spent a bit of time at Caldwell Group as well.
Excellent. Over to you, Louise.
So I am the current CFO, as you said, at Co-op Bank. Prior to that, I was the Chief Accounting Officer for 2 years. Only recently stepped into the CFO role last November. And before working at the bank, I was the Deputy CFO at University Superannuation Scheme, which is one of the UK's largest pension funds. And when I was there, I was responsible for a lot of finance transformation work and developing the function. Before then, I worked in Deloitte for 13 years. I was a senior manager, and towards the latter part of my career there, I was heavily involved in finance transformation as well. So that's me.
Excellent. Pass you over to Ian. I know also was from Deloitte, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so trained with Deloitte, so became a chartered accountant back in 2002. So quite a long time ago now, and been out in industry ever since. Very similar to Michael, really. So ex-CFO of Music Magpie, very recent change for me that I've moved to Chief Operating Officer now. So I've been with the business for 8 years, back to 2013. Been CFO for 6 years within the business, and recently in April this year we completed an IPO. So primary to that, I was primarily sort of heavily involved in sort of private equity, sort of working in private equity businesses, so Ultimate Products prior to Music Magpie, and then we floated Music Magpie in April of this year, when I've made the step then through to COO in a more centralised role.
Excellent. So moving straight into the questions, I'll go straight for Michael first, which is what do you need to prepare for when you move into the role of the CFO?
Yeah, I think it's just recognising it is a different role from being a controller or being a finance director. It's a role whereby you're not just responsible for kind of counting the numbers, but you're more responsible for actually making the numbers. So it's more of a business role than just a financial role. So you have a wider input into strategy, a wider input in terms of the wider business, the deliverables that the business has. And I find in the role that it's not necessarily what you know that matters as much now. It's the questions you ask and actually how you handle yourself and how to get things done. So there's a lot more focus around personal skills and negotiating skills and presentational skills to bring people along with you. So I won't say I don't do any work, and I'm sure kind of Louise and kind of Ian would say that they work incredibly hard as well, but you're not just working in your own position, you're kind of getting other people to work collectively for the group. It is much more about driving the business forward rather than being the best accountant you can be.
Yeah, okay, good. Anybody else got any additional comments on that one? Louise?
Yeah, so one thing that stands in my mind, someone told me as I was making the move, stepping up to CFO, was that it's not just about putting the effort and the hours in. I think it never has been, or has it really, working in finance. We all make decisions every single day, but as the CFO, they said, you can't just solve the problem by working harder. You will be judged on the quality of your decisions and the quality of what it is that you're doing. And that's not all about the hours that you put in. It's about the questions you ask, the challenge that you raise, and the debate that you have in the various sessions, the exco and board meetings that you're in. So I think it's about the thinking, and it's about the asking, it's about the understanding, the challenging, and the data, not necessarily production and output and volume.
Excellent. Ian, anything to add on that one?
I think it's about finding that appropriate blend really between sort of making sure you're still very much in the detail in terms of understanding your numbers, understanding the construct of those numbers, and equally picking out areas where as a fact that things may be going wrong around all of that, but equally balancing that with the strategic aspect as Michael and Louise have just said really, in essence in terms of helping to drive that business rather than just it being sort of backward facing and just looking at the historical numbers all the time.
Yeah, okay, good. Moving into the second question, which I'll ask Louise. So this is kind of based around, how the role of CFO is different really from kind of your traditional head of finance or FD role. So if I ask that question to you, Louise.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about that, I would say that certainly where I work and my role, I would say that there's 3 different roles that I have. So first, I'm the CFO, and I echo everything that Michael said earlier about driving the numbers, not just counting the numbers. That really resonated with me. So that's a big key difference, and all the things we just talked about forward looking, not just backward looking. I think the 2 other roles that I hold now, which I didn't have before and is a key difference, is being an executive member. And in that sense, you've got to be able to understand and really lead non-financial things as well. So how is the organisation doing on operational resilience? That's not necessarily my bread and butter, and it's not necessarily what I've spent my career looking at, but it is something that you need to understand and know enough about to challenge and really take that executive leadership role across the organisation seriously and meaningfully. And then the third role that I hold is a board member. So again, in the same way as that leadership piece at Exco is important, the governance piece on the board is critical. So I'd say it's not just one role, it's 3. And the theme around those roles are that you've got to look outside of finance, you've got to understand your business, and you've got to really question and challenge and seek to get out of finance, really.
Yeah, great. Michael, if I ask the same question to you, because obviously you've held a number of finance director roles as well and been in the role of CFO for a number of years. So what would you say on that one?
Yeah, I think it's the point Ian made earlier about that change in mindset from not looking back and kind of looking at historic balance sheets and what you've been doing around looking forward. And it's not just looking forward to the next month or kind of the month after that. You've got to have a business plan that goes out in the longer term. So, you're talking about a 10, 20-year time horizon, particularly something like EG where you've got electric vehicles. We're thinking of kind of business planning out to 2050. And it's having that vision, not just to see the future in the short term, but to look around the corners and see where the opportunities are, where the risks are, and how you mitigate those risks and how you capitalize on the opportunities. And you're responsible for that strategy. You need to make sure you deliver organic growth and M&A and keep the business moving forward in the right direction.
Yeah, fantastic. Ian, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, I think it's just that wider knowledge across the business. You have to understand every aspect of your organisation now, whereas if it's finance, it's a little bit more just around your accounting, your audit and presenting those numbers. None more so than in COVID period, sort of this time last year, when all of a sudden the CFO certainly had to step up, certainly had to be heavily involved across the wider aspects across what it could mean for the business overall. Couldn't just go and hide back in finance essentially and just say, I've just got some management accounts to do now. It was about the business critical aspect that very much needed to be brought to the fore. And you were there as an experienced executive with that knowledge that you've got across the business in terms of how you can input into that. So it's about getting dragged in. I think the important thing around that is it's the respect then that you get from the rest of the organisation, in terms of liaising with whether it's your CMO, whether it's your CTO, whether it's your commercial teams and things like that, if they see you as someone who absolutely has the knowledge of that business accordingly and can understand how they work and they function, that's really key to being a successful CFO, I think.
Okay. Sticking with yourself, Ian, what would you say the main challenges and obstacles that you found whilst you were in the role of CFO? What, compared to maybe previous positions that you'd held, what were the challenges?
Yeah, I think the first thing probably is the demand that can be placed on your time. Everyone wants some of your time. If there's a finance aspect to whatever people want to do, they want you involved in that meeting, involved in that discussion, they want to email you about it and get your input around it all. And equally, I think one of the challenges sometimes is that if you have sort of stepped up through from finance, people can see you on different levels within the organisations when they knew you previously. So as an example, I'll still get stuff in Magpie now that I don't really need to see or need to be involved in, but some of the organisations go, oh, this looks finance, so it must be Ian's responsibility to kind of do this. So it's about managing your team accordingly, I think, so that your time can be utilised in the most effective way across the business and having a great team sort of working underneath you. I think the second challenge I think I've found very often is, as we've grown as a business in particular, is the vast amount of information that can happen across the business. And I think people are always minded to want to present a bit of information in the way that best supports their argument. You often finish up with more than one version of the truth, and therefore having something whereby the business can fully appreciate every aspect. We used to be at Magpie when I first joined, it was very, very sales driven and sales focused, often sometimes to the detriment of sort of profitability and margin. And we made sure that the whole business fully understood all of that in terms of, well, you can go for top line sales, but if you're not making any margin on it, that's the in terms of profitability. And it was educating the business overall around that so that we do use one version of the reports. Everyone looks at the same numbers, essentially to help all move in the same direction.
Yeah, okay. Louise, if I ask this to you as well, I suppose for you, very recently going into the role of CFO, so I'm guessing there's been a number of things that you've experienced maybe that you hadn't before. So what would you say have been the main challenges and obstacles for yourself?
I mean, I would say the number one challenge is exactly what Ian has said, which is choosing where you spend your time, because it's limited and the bandwidth is that much wider that you could spend your day in meetings all day and actually not have any time to think about the things that are important at times. So that I would certainly echo is the number one. I think personally, the stepping up into the CFO role, it is a challenge. Again, sort of echoing something that Ian said around people seeing you in that new role as opposed to the old role and wanting to still approach you on things that really is not right in the new remit, and then being able to not feel guilty about stepping away from that. So linking that all together, there are a number of areas that are new to me in my role that I've not done before. So one thing that is perhaps not typical everywhere is that legal sits in the finance function in the bank, and so for the first time I'm leading the legal function as well, which is a challenge for me. Is I'm not a lawyer, that's not my profession, and so placing that reliance and trust in that team, and they're an excellent team, but knowing how to do that without personally getting involved is a new skill in some ways, albeit you obviously develop that on the way up, but that has been something that I've had to get used to. There are quite a number of very technical areas that is my bread and butter from my old role as Chief Accounting Officer. Regulatory reporting and treasury finance, for example, is two that I would point to in my role. And I do enjoy getting into the detail on that. And so it's been a challenge to not do that in the same way, because you can't spend your time delving into as much detail. So I think one of the challenges is choosing where you spend the time, choosing what needs that detailed view and what doesn't. And the areas that are new to me in the role will, in the early days, get a bit more of that detail attention from me as I'm understanding and learning about what that entails, so that I can then more confidently step away from some of that detail in my role that I need to make it all work together.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Michael, you must have had some obstacles and challenges over at Eurogarages when you were the CFO.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And before I kind of get there, I fully agree with what Louise and Ian have said. So, that they've made really valid points. Probably the two things I would add on top of what's been said already, it is kind of the wins that you need to have as kind of a CFO. There's a line to walk where you're in charge of the controls of the business, but again, you need to ensure the business can be entrepreneurial. So that walking the line to make sure that the business is performing how it should be doing, but within a framework that you're happy with. And that's quite a hard line to walk sometimes. There are still people who see the CFO as being the chief bean counter, or there are people who see the CFO as being the person that stops initiatives taking place, whether that's for capital allocation or other reasons. So having that judgment, being able to kind of bring that to bear, that's a key challenge, particularly somewhere where it is kind of like EG, which is so dynamic. And the second point is that dynamism itself. You have to be aware that businesses are kind of dynamic living organisms, and what works today might not work in 3 months' time. And sometimes when you're in the detail too much, you can't see that bigger picture. And you need to be conscious of that when it comes to things like organization design and how you deploy capital and how the business just functions. So being aware that today is a different day than yesterday and tomorrow is going to be a different day than today is hugely important in terms of how you conduct yourself, where you make recommendations, and how you see the business growing. And that's a real challenge because, again, you're the person that's looking into the future more than anybody else.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. I suppose it's probably worth sticking with yourself now again on this question. So when you were in the role of CFO, if you could pinpoint, a couple of things that you enjoyed the most about that actual position, what would you say they were?
Oh, no, the thing I love about CFO, two things I love about it is you're at the heart of the action. You're in the arena, you're kind of participating, you're not stood in the stands kind of watching other people play, you're playing. And that to me, if you're on the pitch, you're making a difference, that's what you're there for. I always take a huge amount of pleasure out of kind of seeing change take effect, rather than here's a set of management accounts, and next month here's another set of management accounts, and here's another set of management accounts. You're actually at the heart of the action. And then to me, it's always been the journey. It's always been taking something that's, 2, adding another 2 to it and getting 2 + 2 = 7 and creating that shareholder value and being able to look back with a good team, 5 years later and say, remember what it was like when we first joined, look at how far we've come. So being part of that journey and being the heart of that journey to me is the best thing of being a CFO.
Louise, how about you? Obviously, again, it's been 8 or 9 months in the role, is it? So what have you enjoyed the most so far?
Well, very specific example to my organisation first, and I'll broaden it out a bit. So I think my biggest highlight has been first quarter results of the bank, where we returned to profitability for the first time in many, many years. Yeah. And, it was, a little bit of luck that that happened while I was in the seat, because the seeds of that were sown, a year ago, multiple years ago, and the continued development of the bank. So that was certainly a highlight of my career so far as CFO, from going loss-making to profit-making earlier this year. But I think it is that being in the middle of things, it is that seeing the change really take effect, that you can really influence the organisation around you. You can, not just the financial performance, not just the business performance, but actually the day-to-day working lives of your colleagues around you. Being on Exco, you're there making decisions that are affecting everybody who works in the organisation, and I really do enjoy that and being a part of the action. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Ian, how about yourself?
I think I've been really fortunate, obviously, with working in private equity for sort of the last 15 years prior to taking the business public, working with some great entrepreneurs and being able to sort of see their visions in terms of what they want to try and achieve and helping to deliver that. I think as an accountant by profession, going through that finance route, you're always very mindful of sort of the risk aspects to the business, always mindful of processes. You never sort of lose that mindset. And be able to sort of blend that with an entrepreneurial vision in terms of what we want to deliver, and ensuring that can be done in an appropriate way effectively for the business has given me a lot of joy and a lot of enjoyment. I think, seeing things, as the guy said, seeing things very much come to life that you feel you're able to play a real part in terms of delivering, and seeing that impact in terms of the numbers.
Yeah, okay. I'm moving on to the final question. Really a piece of advice, really, for anyone who's looking to get into the shoes of a CFO, whether that's a management accountant now who's just qualified, who wants to be a CFO in the next 5 to 10 years, or even an FD who's planning to kind of make that move very, very soon. If you could kind of give one piece of advice, what would it be? I'll stick with yourself, Ian, first of all.
I think it depends at what level you're at, to be honest, in terms of sort of the next move for you, in terms of your thoughts. If you're at a lower level within an organisation, it's about really sort of learning from the people above you, learning from the existing CFO, how they operate across the business, and just taking all of that on board. Again, that's the benefit of the learnings I've had over 20 years in terms of people that I've worked with. I think if you're about to make that step up and looking to make that step up, particularly within your existing business, it's about, as we said, really immersing yourself then within the wider aspects of the business, and ensuring you've got those relationships well cemented and you fully understand the workings across the wider organisation rather than just a pure finance perspective.
Yeah. Louise, how about yourself? What would you offer as a piece of advice?
Can I have two? So, one would be, make sure you have a mentor. So somebody you can trust, someone you can go to, someone who you can, ask advice, whether that's inside the organisation or elsewhere. I think that's really important, because it is a tough job. When you're doing it for the first time, you benefit immensely from somebody who's been there and done it before. The second thing I would say is, don't be shy about saying you don't know or you don't understand, and can someone take you through and explain it to you. So the temptation can be that now you're in the top seat in terms of finance, that people expect that you know everything in terms of finance. Now, clearly that's not the case, even if it was something that you've been deeply involved in your previous role. Things move on and you're not in the same level of detail. So if something isn't ringing true to you, if something isn't immediately understandable, just ask, and don't be afraid to do that, and ensure that that's all tied up with the development plan as well. I think make sure that you're very focused on the things that you need to look at in terms of your own experience.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Michael, very experienced CFO, so I'm hoping for some very, very good advice here. So over to you for the last piece of advice.
Yeah, and I'm going to copy Louise. Louise had 2 bits of advice, so I want to steal 2 bits of advice as well. I think the first thing is, as you're considering changing jobs, don't chase the money, chase the experience. When you become a CFO, you need to have a breadth of experience. As Louise said, you might not know the answers to all the questions, and never worry about saying you don't know something. But you're going to have exposure to capital markets or fundraising, banks, investors, and kind of the more breadth of knowledge you get in acquisitions and divestments, the better you'll be. So chase those roles that give you that breadth of experience, rather than just pay a little bit more than you're being paid. And then I think the second bit of advice, and it's expanding on something that Ian said earlier around understand your business, really understand what you do. It's that development, and it's that keeping yourself growing. It's not just understanding your own company, it's understanding the sector you work in. You'll get asked questions about how you've done against company B as a competitor. So understanding the sector, understanding those dynamics is massively important. And again, just to reiterate what I said at the start of the session, it's a different role. It's not about being the best accountant. It's about being able to influence. It's about being able to negotiate. It's about being able to present. And there's tons of books, there's tons of YouTube videos around how you can do these better. And that investment in your own personal development, taking the time to understand what you do, either by yourself or, as Louise said, with a mentor, is massively important. The CFO is not the end of the journey. It's the start of the next stage of the journey for you.
Excellent. Michael, Louise, Ian, thank you very much. I think it's been, very, very useful. And again, for me, I get lots of messages, whether it's on email or LinkedIn, asking about these things. And, for this one, these were questions that were sent to me. from a lot of, as I say, either kind of management accountant, FC, FD level, kind of coming in with questions around the topics we discussed today. So I think it will be a really, really useful tool to ping out to people and hopefully help move people up the career ladder and just give them a little bit more insight as to what they need to be prepared for when they're moving into the shoes of a CFO. So thank you very much for all your time today. It's very much appreciated. Thanks, guys.